Hi, it's me, Brandon. How are you?
Good. How are you, Estella?
Good. Anybody else on? Oh yeah, here we go.
Here's Randy.
Well, he just went off. Was this part of a regular Wednesday Bible study or class or something?
No, it wasn't. It's the tradition at St. Thomas to do some kind of Wednesday evening service or study during Lent.
Right.
So this is what we came up with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, our church here isn't able or didn't do anything for Lent, and I really missed it. I mean, I was searching around for where, I mean, we're not meeting in person yet here.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we're not either, but we will be this Sunday. So Palm Sunday is going to be the first day that we are back together in a limited sort of capacity.
right.
Welcome, everybody. Oh, I'm about to sneeze. Well, if that happens, I apologize. Becky and Brian sent me a text message saying that they are away on spring break with Bethany, and so they won't be joining us tonight. And Pam mentioned to me last week that this time this time of the evening just isn't the best time for her. So I don't know if she's going to be able to make it with us tonight or not. But welcome, everyone. Patty, is Vaughn joining us too? Yeah, okay, great.
He's getting cleaned up real quick. He was outside some wood.
Gotcha. All right. Well, I think this is all of us. Let's go ahead and begin with a word of prayer. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. O Lord, our guide, make your presence known to us tonight as we study your holy word. As we seek you, reveal yourself to us. For happy are those who find wisdom and those who get understanding. For wisdom's income is better than silver, and her revenue better than gold. We seek to trust in the Lord with all our heart and not rely on our own insight, but in all our ways to acknowledge God, and the Lord will make straight our paths. Amen. That was taken from Psalm 3, which you may recognize as a wisdom psalm. All right, well, before we jump into tonight's curriculum, does anybody have any questions from last week or any of the prior weeks about what we've covered so far? I don't want to let any stone go by unturned. And of course, it's okay if you don't. Just know that you can ask a question at any time, and we'll jump right in there with them. This is our last time together. I can't believe it. This is Lent is over very soon. Sunday begins Holy Week, and so I hope that you've enjoyed this Lenten journey together. I know I have.
Very much.
Well, tonight we are going to kind of wrap up everything. We're going to tie up some loose ends, and we're going to talk about the Psalms in a bit of an abstract, to kind of take a wide-angle lens view of what we've been looking at. And we're going to look at how the Psalms have been used in worship in Jewish and Christian communities throughout the ages. And we're going to take a look at what it means to pray the Psalms. And I want to kind of have a discussion about how the Psalms have, where you find connection to God through the Psalms, or where you felt God in the context of praying the Psalms in worship or in your private devotion. And I want to hear, if you've got any takeaways from this. So, I say it every week. I say, I talked too much last week. I'm going to try not to talk so much this time. I mean it. I mean it this time. So y'all, you're going to have to do some talking a little bit later, because the best way to go through 2,000 plus years of history is to do it real fast. So we are going to kind of fly through some of the ways that the Psalms have been used in worship over their long history, much longer than 2,000 years, longer than 3,000 years. So let me read just a little bit about the Psalms that from Walter Brigham here. Many of you have said that you went ahead and got a hold of this book, The Spirituality of the Psalms, which has been guiding most of our discussion this time. There's another similarly short book called Praying the Psalms that Brueggemann put out, and it's also very valuable. And in here, Brueggemann talks about how the Psalter, as we have it, is a compilation of many centuries of works. And we kind of talked about that earlier when we were taking a kind of a look at the historical aspects of the book of Psalms. The majority of the Psalms that we have in the Psalter were, scholars think, were composed during what's called the Second Temple period. So in Israel's history, Israel and Judah's history, God brought them out of Egypt. There was wandering in the desert. They took possession of the Holy Land, the land of Canaan. David was the great king. David's son Solomon was the one to build the temple for God. And up until that time, the wandering tribes had worshipped in the tabernacle that was built under Moses, sort of traveling tent with beautiful adornments. And so David's son Solomon built the first temple. After Solomon's rule, the people of Israel split. The northern kingdom was called Israel, and the southern kingdom, including the city of Jerusalem, was called Judah. During the rise of the Assyrian Empire, the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom and took them into exile. That was in the 8th century BCE. And then a couple hundred years later, the southern kingdom, Judah, fell to Babylon. And the Babylonians carried those Israelites away. And at that time, they sacked Jerusalem. The temple was destroyed. And God's chosen people went into exile. Well, something very interesting happened during this time. And this is something that scholars talk about that really differentiates the Israelite people from their neighbors culturally and religiously, because it was widely believed that the God of a people was fixed to the land of that people. And so when foreign invaders came in and defeated the people and occupied that land, what that meant was that their gods were not strong enough to protect them, and their gods were defeated also. And many times the cults of those deities would collapse at the time of um, foreign occupation or once those people were exiled. And so something very different happened with the people, the Israelite people, that when they were sent into exile, the God's own prophets told his people, I am going with you. I will still be your God. Yes, I've allowed this to happen to you because of your sin, because you went and you worshiped other gods. You were not faithful to my covenant. But I am still your God. I will still respect my end of the covenant, and I will bring you back. I will be your God in exile, and I will bring you back to your land. And so this, culturally, this is one of the, if not the first, then one of the first examples of a people retaining loyalty to their God, in exile, and not only retaining loyalty, but having a God exiled with the people, a God going away with the people, and still being loyal to the people, even after foreign occupation and conquest. And so we see that reflected in the Psalms. Earlier, we talked about Psalm 137, about how the psalmist is talking about, standing by the rivers of Babylon, and our captors asked us for mirth. Sing us a song of Zion. And the psalmist says, "Let me never forget Jerusalem." And so this psalmist is calling out to not to the void, but to the people's God who went with them into exile and promised to bring them back. So when the Israelite people were gathered back together, the Persians came and took over all of the lands that the Babylonians and Assyrians had conquered, and the Persians were somewhat generous in that they let the conquered people sort of go back to their homelands in certain cases, and the Israelites, that was one of the cases. And so we have the beginning of what's called the Second Temple period. So this is recorded in the Old Testament in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and in First and Second Chronicles. And so this is the time when Jerusalem is being rebuilt by a people who have come back out of exile. And for a while there was a sort of a puppet government going on, and Nehemiah had to really butt his head against that to get the temple rebuilt, but it happened. And so this is, scholars always call this the Second Temple period. Well, the Second Temple period extended for a very long time. And so, a few hundred years later, about 400 years later, we see Jesus at the temple. And at this time, Herod the Great started a big temple refurbishment. And so the temple that had been under construction for 46 years at the time that Jesus came and turned over the tables of the money changers. This was Herod the Great's temple. It's still the Second Temple, still Second Temple period, and scholars studying the Judaism of that time called this the Second Temple period, Second Temple Judaism. And from this period of Second Temple Judaism, we get a lot of the bulk of the Psalter. What we know about worship, Jewish worship at this time, is that according to the old instructions, that sacrifices were to be held at the temple in the morning and at the evening. We know that for regular piety of the Jews, they were to pray throughout the day at certain set hours. So we know from the prophet Jeremiah in his book that he was punished by the people in power at the time because he was caught praying 3 times a day. So we've got a ritualistic aspect at the temple that happened in the morning and the evening. We've got an example of Jewish personal piety happening at 3 regular times a day. And then in other places, particularly in the Psalms themselves, we have examples of greater or even idealistic Jewish piety that says to pray more often. So let's take a look at our old friend Psalm 119. Psalm 119 that is so long, and of course we're not going to look at all of it, but let's look at Psalm 119 verse 62 first. Psalm 119:62. At midnight I rise to praise you because of your righteous ordinances. Hang on to that. Let's turn over, still in 119, verse 164. 164. 7 times a day I praise you because of your righteous ordinances. Okay, so so from what we understand about both communal worship and individual worship through individual piety, there are set hours of the day that are regular for prayer in the experience, the Jewish experience of the Second Temple period. This is important because Jesus was a Jew of the Second Temple period. This was his piety also. And so we see some of the practices that Jesus himself was performing and teaching his disciples, and the times he was praying with his disciples, is influenced by an ongoing tradition of prayer and when to do it. So I bring that all up to say that at the time of corporate worship at the temple, we already know that there are psalms that are called Psalms of Ascents, and these are psalms that were likely sung or recited as people were making their way up to the temple for corporate worship. We know that the guild of temple musicians were responsible for writing a lot of the psalms that we have during that Second Temple period. And so these were psalms that were used in corporate liturgy. And both Christian and Jewish and also Islamic tradition has always incorporated the Psalms from worship with worship, because that's just the way it's always been. The Psalms have always been used in times of prayer. So remember last week when we were talking about Jesus on the cross, and his very words were, calling out in his greatest anguish, he was quoting a psalm. He was quoting Psalm 22. And we talked about how that was because of his deep familiarity with the not only Jewish Holy Scripture, but with the Psalms in particular. And that Jesus, in his moment of prayer, was reciting a psalm because that was part of Jewish prayer practice. The Psalms always played a role in prayer. I want to take a look now, if you've got your Bibles, at the Gospel according to Mark. So let's take a look at Mark chapter 14. So at this point in Mark chapter 14, we've got the Last Supper, and Jesus is in the upper room with his disciples. They are breaking bread together. According to Mark and Matthew and Luke, the three synoptics, this was a Passover meal that he was sharing with his disciples. In John, it's less. It happens on the prior day in the week, which is a bit of an anomaly. But so Jesus and his disciples are having a Passover meal, like the good pious Jews of the Second Temple period that they were. And after the meal, in Mark chapter 14, verse 26, it says, "When they had sung the hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives." So likely what this verse is talking about is called the Hallel. And this is a grouping of 6 psalms that traditionally are always sung at the high Jewish holy days, particularly at Passover. And so these psalms are Psalm 113 through 118. And Psalm 118 is kind of the culmination of these 6 psalms that were always sung as a group together. Well, I say they were always sung as a group together, but there's, according to Midrash, there's some rabbis that kind of argue about that. Some say Psalm 113 was sung before the meal. Some say Psalm 113 and 114 were sung before the meal, and then the others. But regardless, most scholars believe that when Mark's gospel is talking about Jesus and his disciples had sung the hymn after the meal, they're talking about Psalm 118 in particular. And if you look at Psalm 118, it begins with giving thanks to the Lord for his goodness, for his steadfast love. And then it goes into this communal praise. Let Israel say, his steadfast love endures forever. Let the house of Aaron say, his steadfast love endures forever. Let those who fear the Lord say, his steadfast love endures forever. And I'll let you take a look at Psalm 118 yourself. But this is, it lauds the Lord for the wonders that he has done, for the way that he has saved his people, and encourages all those who worship and love the Lord to give praise to God for his steadfast love. This all goes very nicely with the Passover story of how God delivered the people of Israel, or the Israelite people, from slavery and oppression in Egypt. So here's one instance in the New Testament where scholars believe there's a clear reference to the Psalms and the way that Jesus used Psalms in worship with his disciples. Let's see. when we look at the text of the New Testament as a whole, there's lots of references to Old Testament material in the New Testament, of course, because Christianity is born out of Judaism. And so the new text of Christianity tie in all kinds of references from the Jewish scriptures in order to point to where the Messiah was talked about and the saving deeds of God were talked about before. So in these references of the Old Testament in the New Testament, nothing is more frequently referenced than material from the Psalms. The book of Psalms is referenced more than any other Old Testament book in the New Testament. And I think that's really kind of telling, because you know, the writers of the New Testament material could have gone to all kinds of places, and they did, of course. But to go to the Psalms most frequently tells us a few things. First of all, it tells us, it gives us an idea of the level of familiarity that the average Jewish convert to Christianity would have had to the Psalms, right? Because they were praying the Psalms in their regular corporate worship and personal piety. It tells us how the early church looked at the book of Psalms. And it tells us about worship practices in the early church. And we see the Psalms pop up in the Acts of the Apostles also. We see, particularly in the Acts of the Apostles, we see a couple of times when Peter and some of the other apostles are going to the temple and they encounter someone who needs healing. They're going to the temple for their regular hourly worship. Peter encounters a man who was lame at when he went to the temple to worship at the third hour of the day. So that's what the original text says. The third hour of the day would have been kind of like 9 o'clock in the morning. It's 3 hours after sunrise. So this is the regular morning. So we know the times and roughly and the general practices of Second Temple Judaism. We know that after Jesus's ascension, the disciples, the first apostles, were practicing Jews with an understanding of who the Messiah is. So the new Christian community drew its own worship practices from the worship practices of that they were familiar with, and those of Second Temple Judaism, because they were observant Jews, right? And this continued to shape Christian worship throughout the ages. And you know, Randy's brought up before, and it's true that the Muslim tradition also has its own Psalter, and a very similar tradition. And as you probably know, that Jews, Christians, and Muslims are all called collectively the people of the book. And because we all draw our spiritual lineage back to Abraham. And so the practice of reciting this holy poetry, or singing more commonly, this holy poetry of the Psalms is something that has gone on to all three branches of the Abrahamic faiths. You all with me so far? Okay, any questions so far? Yeah, go ahead, Estella.
Would there have been calls to worship? I mean, like a bell or a sound or a shofar or something like that? I mean, with without clocks being everywhere, how would you know it was the third hour of the day?
Right. Well, that's a good question. I think we rely too much on our clocks. The people at that time had a more intuitive sense, of kind of how long it's been since sunrise, how long it's going to be until the sun is straight up in the sky, and then how long it's going to be until sunset. But yes, there would have been bells, there would have been a shofar, there would have been sounds of people going up to worship. So yeah, for sure. And when we look at how the Psalms have evolved throughout the centuries and have influenced Christian worship, yes, we're just about to go there. As a matter of fact, a bell at the monastery or at the cathedral or at the local parish church was rung whenever it was time to assemble for worship. And of course, we're all familiar with the sounds of the call to worship for Muslims as well. That beautiful chant. So we took a look at a couple of places in Psalm 119 where it talks about I wake at midnight to praise your name, and 7 times a day I praise you. Well, this is a sort of a place where the Psalms themselves become sort of paradigmatic of the shaping of corporate worship. So the Psalms are used in corporate worship, and the Psalms are now beginning to be used in order to shape public worship in that sort of self-referential kind of way. So this really takes hold in the 6th century of the Common Era, when Benedict organizes the first monastery. And the monasteries really took the divine hours or the divine offices and set up a very structured way of praying and times for praying. So this, of course, evolved over the centuries, and in the Middle Ages it was expanded, and then later it was cut back, and anyway, but the major Benedictine practice that came about in right at the end of antiquity and at the beginning of the Middle Ages, and exists up to now in many places, is this tradition of praying 7 times a day. And they of course have their Latin names. There's Matins, Lauds, Prima, Terce, Sext, Nones, Vespers, and Compline. Compline was kind of a later addition, and then later in the Middle Ages, this the office of Matins kind of got split up a little bit, and so it turned into a vigil. It turned into 3 different services at night. And honestly, like, when did these monks sleep? I don't know, because it sounds like if their times of corporate worship have been split into 9 times a day, including 3 or 4 offices at night, then I don't know how they did it. But of course, they probably had different choirs of monks that would do carry on these offices at different times. So the word office in this context is related to the Latin for duty. So praying the office is our spiritual duty, our Christian duty, to pray, to worship God in this way, and to carry the hopes and the health and of the whole world. That is the duty of those religious communities who have devoted themselves thus. And indeed, there were medieval writers who said that if it weren't due to the religious communities who have borne the weight of the world due to their prayers, then the world would have stopped spinning. So this office tradition was held in very high esteem in the early and late Middle Ages. I was going to go someplace else with that. Hang on. Maybe it'll come back to me. Any questions so far?
When you're talking about corporate worship,
Mhm.
did they only go to the temple, or were there smaller gathering places where, I mean, the temple might be very far from you, and if you're old or unable to walk, I mean, then you'd have to pray at home. But were there other places?
Are you talking about the Jewish people?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so even during the Second Temple period, there were lots of Jews still in the diaspora. And so particularly in North Africa and in Syria, there were large.
I'm talking about in any particular town, if you couldn't get to the temple, were there other smaller places where people could go if they wanted to engage in corporate worship, as
Yeah.
opposed to just praying at home?
Sure, of course, yeah. They had synagogues that they would meet in, and Jesus talks about going to the synagogue to teach, and so really the people who lived in Judea at the time of Jesus, they the times that they went all the way to Jerusalem were few and far between in a lifetime, really. I mean, well, a lot of I don't want to say in a lifetime, but once a year, twice a year, maybe. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we have Jesus going to Jerusalem just once, and in John, Jesus goes to Jerusalem 3 times throughout his ministry, and so it was quite a trek to get from Galilee and its surrounding regions to Jerusalem, especially if your primary mode of transportation was foot. So, and there were lots of people in that same category. Yeah. In the summer of 2019, I got to visit the Holy Land, and it was a really incredible experience. And in the archaeological site at Magdala, home of Mary Magdalene, of course, they've found what they believe to be a Jewish synagogue for that town, and it's really very exciting. So yeah, there were other places where people would gather together, in less formal, shall we say, arrangements than what was going on at the temple. So during this this monastic and later cathedral tradition that grew up around praying several times a day, it's all these different services are sort of hinge on reading through the Psalter. So in a normal Benedictine community, one would pray through the Psalter in its entirety throughout the course of these different services, completed in 1 week. So you're praying through the Psalter every week in its entirety. So, and that they're not leaving out the imprecatory parts. They're not leaving out the crazy stuff. They're doing it all every week. And this Benedict of Nursia talks about this, and he talks about the Psalms in a very kind of peculiar way to our ears, but it's the metaphor he uses has lasted throughout the generations. He talks about what he calls the medicine of the Psalms, and how the Psalms themselves are it's a healing and cathartic thing to pray through the Psalms for the soul of the person who does the praying. That so it's kind of like you take your multivitamin every day so that you don't get sick, and if you do get sick, you might take a little more extra vitamin C and zinc, right? And for Benedict, the Psalms were medicinal. Whatever was troubling you in your spirit, there was you pray pray the Psalms as medicine, and that's where we get some of these allegorical readings of the more imprecatory passages of the Psalms. So if you remember when we were talking about the imprecatory Psalms, we were talking about, well, what value does some of this language have for the people that are praying the Psalms most often, the monks and the nuns who ostensibly were living in a holy community and getting along together, and everything was fine. And so in order to pray these Psalms and say, do to my enemy this and such and this, that, and the other, they sort of had to allegorize that and say, my enemy in this case is the demon of lust, or the demon of sloth, or the demon of avarice. And so these imprecations were understood allegorically in that way for these very holy people who probably didn't have enemies outside the monastery wall, and let's hope they didn't have enemies on the inside either. But so the Psalms have always been a part of Christian liturgy, and because they were always a part of Jewish liturgy as well. And this is a thread of continuity that we can see, going back through the early church and into the Second Temple Judaism. One reason that the Psalms are used in worship is like Brueggemann has told us in his own words. It's because no matter where you are in your own spiritual life or whatever's happening in your life, there's an entry point into Scripture and into conversing with God somewhere in the Psalter, since they sort of carry the whole gamut of human emotion. Another reason that the Psalms have always been used in worship is because of their very nature. So if you think about Jewish worship, the Torah is the crux of the law. The Torah is the crux of everything, really. The first 5 books of the Old Testament, the Pentateuch, the Torah. And you don't read through the Psalter very long before getting to these Psalms that turn you back to the Torah, that point back to the Torah. And they're spaced about a third or a fourth of the way through that 150 collection of 150 Psalms in the Psalter. But where the Torah was given by Moses and it's fixed, the Psalms are a reflection. They are our voices. They are the voices of the people who worship God through the Torah. All right. So they give us, they tell of our responses to Holy Scripture and to God. And so this is a very, does that make sense? It's whereas the Torah is very fixed and concrete. We have something like sound bounces off of concrete. Okay, so we've got something that is a reflection off of that, and that is the Psalms, and they're very human, and they carry all of our emotions, and they show us how people have reacted to life in light of the Torah, life in light of worshiping, being a worshiper of God, and what is okay to say to God. And so that's another reason that the Psalms have had the staying power in our private and corporate worship. Another reason is that, according to scholar Gordon Lathrop, he says that the language of the Psalms in worship matters so much because of the meaning of the assembly. Okay, so he says, in the words of the Psalms, there is no rank here, no gender preference, no inside track. So you've got the, when you look at the Psalter as a whole, the person speaking these Psalms, if you don't know who wrote it, could be anybody, okay? Now, sure, the tradition attributes most of them to David, but there are some that we don't know who wrote them, what gender that person was, what socioeconomic status that was. That might as well have been me. And that's how I can connect to those words. And that's how I can let those words lift me and my current state and my emotions and my heart to God. And that's all I'm going to say about that, because we've got about 13 minutes left and I want to hear what you guys have to say. Yeah, Malin.
Okay, so kind of I guess a trivial question. Would they have sung some of them? I mean, would some of them have been, I mean, since it means song or hymns, would they have sung the Psalms? How do I want to say that? I mean, would that have been a common practice? Would there have been one that was like Onward Christian Soldier that everybody that everybody knew, that would have
Most likely, yeah.
that area of the world? And
sure, yeah,
okay.
Most likely, yes. The Psalms were meant to be sung, and that's why they're still sung in our services. If we can sing them, we will.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but they certainly, not all of them lend themselves to being sung, right? Like some of them are just either poetry of some form, right? I mean,
well, that's a good question, and I think scholars would argue over that too. For instance, I can't imagine singing Psalm 119.
right.
Lord have mercy. Someone shake me. I can't imagine the same tune repeating every 8 verses for 176 verses.
Yeah, the song would end the next day or something. Yeah.
Oh yeah, right. But maybe they did. If this was, if this like it's postulated was used for instructing school age kids, hey, it might have been a song. We don't know. As far as that psalm goes, but yes, the grand majority of them, if not all of them, were intended to be sung originally, and were sung at least through the Old Testament period, or the New Testament period, rather.
Yeah.
And isn't that what cantors do?
Yeah.
In synagogue? I mean, they sing their service, and of course, I've heard them sing, but don't know what they were singing, whether it was a psalm or something else. But yeah, and when we say song, we're thinking about, Johnny Cash or something like that. Well, obviously, the Psalms would not have been sung that way. They would have been more like a chant, maybe, or like the cantors do, which is melodic, but not music as we think of it.
Yeah, the chant tradition came about in the Middle Ages, and as we know it now, and that's because the original music to the Psalms was lost to time, and so we don't know exactly how they would have been performed originally. But yeah, they're intended to be sung for sure. What else?
If they were meant to be sung, do you suppose they had instruments? I mean,
Yeah.
Of some description
Sure. Yeah.
in the service?
There's a psalm. Don't ask me which one right off the top of my head. That says, "Sing to the Lord on the psaltery and the lyre." And so these were two different stringed instruments. The psaltery, as we know from its Greek derivation, was a different stringed instrument than the lyre. It might have been played with a bow, but then we also know that percussive instruments were used in conjunction with singing as well. So tambourines, drums for sure, and there are other psalms that talk about praise God on the trumpet. Well, I would have to look up what the Hebrew word that's translated as trumpet is. I'm not sure what that was, but anyway, yeah. So the Psalms had instrumental accompaniment for sure. Yeah.
Well, Brandon, I actually got to see the arch here in Rome, during the rebellion in the first century. Roman historian talked about the Israeli rebels, attacking them, singing their psalms. He was talking about being off to the fortress Masada, where the heroes' temple is at, where the Romans, finally took it over.
Yeah.
They still do the ceremony up there for the IDF every year for their new officer cadets. They do sing a song. But the arch in Rome actually shows them carrying musical instruments when they sacked the second temple. When the Romans sacked it, shows them carrying out the harps, the flutes, whatever, drums. It shows them actually on the figureheads on that arch. And it's a huge arch in Rome, and it's still there.
That's so cool. I love it. Well, what else we got? How do you connect with the Psalms? What drew you to this Lenten study? Has there been a time when you've really connected with the Psalms, or with a psalm in particular, and what did it mean to you?
I mean, I think we all grew up with Psalm 23, "The Lord is my shepherd," and that's always, if anybody says to me, what do you think of the song? Is like, "The Lord is my shepherd." I mean, that's the one that comes to mind.
Yeah.
And what drew me to this study mostly was my ignorance about the Psalms. Yes, you hear them at church on Sunday, and some of them you go, what is that? And don't understand it, but of course you forget it by the time you leave the church. So mostly I was interested in finding out more about them, and how to read or how to listen to the imprecatory one that sounds so terrible. And I've gained a lot of insight with regard to those. So.
Thanks. Anybody else?
Yeah, that was pretty much my feeling too. I mean, the only one that as a kid all the way through is Psalm 23. And I mean, it's everywhere, it's in the service, it's in funerals, it's on the little pamphlets that, it's everywhere. The others, it's like, they're there, but you don't really know that they are there, kind of thing. So that was kind of my thing too.
On mine also is Psalm 23. We had a chaplain assigned to our battalion when we went to Gulf War. And every time we got into contact, he got on the radio and we all heard him in our vehicles going through Psalm 23.
Wow.
So, we heard him constantly do it. We even did our Easter ceremonies in Iraq and stuff. And we put the crosses up outside the old city of Ur. So we were actually there at the old city of Ur.
That's
So it was just neat because Chaplain Allen, his wife and Vicky worked together, but Chaplain Allen was the Lutheran chaplain, the Lutheran minister for the church in Fayetteville. And he really, every time we got in contact, he got on the radio and that's what he did. Of course, his vehicle looked like a gypsy caravan. We was all armor plated, and the only thing he had was his vest and a pistol. That's it.
Well, we
Yeah,
just
I think so too. I was just real curious. I just don't think I've ever spent a lot of time there in the Psalms. And sometimes I always feel like our service maybe does a little disservice to the Psalms because so often we only read a small portion of one of them, and you don't really see the whole thing. And it's just been very interesting. I've really enjoyed this.
Yeah, oftentimes in our Eucharistic liturgy, the Psalm is it's kind of this sort of interstitial music between Old Testament reading and epistle, and people don't ask a lot of it, and so they don't get a lot out of it either, and or there's not a lot of context given. The framers of the Revised Common Lectionary, and far be it from me to criticize my betters, but most of the time they've put Psalms thematically with the other themes that are happening in the other scripture readings.
Yeah.
But sometimes it doesn't happen that way, and so there's often less attention, I think, given to the Psalms in our Eucharistic liturgy than the other readings, and that's a like you said, a little bit of a disservice to the Psalms because they're so beautiful, or many of them are, and knowing that the New Testament authors reference the Psalms more than any other material in the Old Testament, it's sort of and knowing that the tradition of praying the Psalms has been continuous for thousands of years.
Yeah, I think that's just amazing.
Yeah, there's a lot to be learned there.
I'm wondering if you would consider doing, I mean, not necessarily now, but at some point in the future, a study of one of the classes of Brueggemann's, the divisions that he made amongst the Psalms. And in fact, I would be interested in participating in one that's the imprecatory Psalms only. So take all the ones that he puts into that category and talk about how whether they do or not relate to each other. If anything, do we know what was going on in the real world at the time that, in their world, when these we think were written. So
yeah, that's a great idea. I haven't talked to Pam about what's coming up after Easter. I'm sure that we're going to do another adult formation study, but we haven't quite mapped that out yet. And which brings me to the next point. We, the clergy at St. Thomas, we want to teach what you all want to learn. And so if there are questions that you've got, let us know what you want to explore. And because we'd love to do that. We'd love to tailor a course of study on something that you want to learn. So anyway, send your ideas to us.
Okay.
Anything else?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been a real pleasure. I hope you guys have gotten a kick out of this. I know I have. This has been just an awful lot of fun. And all right. Well, I hope that you have some takeaways from this, and at least have an idea that because of the rich emotional material that we've got in the Book of Psalms, let that open up your mind and your heart whenever you think about prayer. And remember that no matter how you're feeling, you can't say anything new to God. Someone else has said it, and probably said something more crazy. And so it's okay. It's okay to tell God whatever it is that's on your mind and on your heart. All right, thanks so much, everybody. And like I said, if you've got any ideas about what you want to study next time, send those ideas to us, and we'll get something going. And I wish you a blessed Holy Week and Eastertide, if I don't see you again before then. Estella, it's been such a joy seeing you again, and I'm so glad that you came.
Oh, it's been so good to see all of you. And thanks for letting a foreigner into your life.
No such thing. There's no such thing as a foreigner. Yeah, tell Ramiro we said hi.
Yeah, I will do that.
All right. Good night, everyone.
All right,
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thanks.